This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.
Welcome to the Lake Superior Podcast. I'm Walt Lindelof.
And I'm Frida Wara. We are made stronger by story, and there's no better source than the continent's largest body of fresh water, Lake Superior.
So join us as we highlight the 5 national parks that ring this greatest of the Great Lakes, meet the people, tour the places, and learn about the projects that make these parks and body of water so remarkable.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
I'm Walt Lindelof.
And I'm Frida Wara.
Welcome once again to the Lake Superior Podcast. Today, Frida, something that is really kind of one of these Lake Superior, this region kind of thing, and that is, well, it's moose. Tell us a little bit about what we've got set up here today.
Oh, my goodness. You know, when I first heard Tom Irvine talking about this project, I was like, I got to go. Let me hang out of a helicopter or something. I got to find out what this is about. And then, have you ever really been around a moose?
Only from a distance. I give them their space. Let's put it that way.
Baby, that's smart. That's the Finlander in you. They know, to keep a distance.
Keep your distance from the moose because they are large.
Oh my goodness.
But powerful.
You know what's really cool? We found a chick today that we're going to talk to that is like, she's not afraid of these stinking moose. No, and when you're from Minnesota, heck no, that's a big dog in the backyard.
The big other part of this is that as we've talked to a lot of people around the Lake Superior region, the moose population is something that's very important to keep tabs of and know how many you have in your region. And that's actually why we're going to talk here with Michelle Karstensen, who is Wildlife Health Group Leader with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. Welcome to the podcast, Michelle.
Thanks for having me.
This looks like this is going to be really an interesting conversation here over the next little bit, but you sound like you've had kind of a busy winter over in northern Minnesota and you're working to learn more about the state's moose population. What does that all mean? What's going on?
Well, it's been a very moose-filled winter for us, which, if you ask me, is a great way to spend a winter because they're pretty much the coolest mammal, but I'm a little biased. But we had the privilege to launch a new study this winter that was funded through basically the state lottery dollars in Minnesota. So It's the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota's Resources, called LCCMR. And we competed and successfully got about $2 million, just over $2 million, to launch a new moose study focusing on juveniles. So those are going to be moose that are now in their first winter. So they're about 9 months old. And what we want to know is how many can survive over winter and at what age do they become reproductively contributing to the population? Because that's really important to think about, growth in a population. You have to have young moose that survive.
Yeah.
So we're trying to understand what happens to this younger group of moose and at what age do they start reproducing and adding to the population, and kind of if they're good mothers at their first time. Are they able to, raise calves that survive the first year that they actually are able to calve? So those are some of the big questions we're trying to understand.
So why was that something you wanted to do with this particular one? You kind of touched on it there to see maybe how it might trend into the future population, but this was kind of specific. Why that route?
Yeah, because we've had the opportunity over the past several decades to do moose research in Minnesota, both through tribal entities that have been working for quite a number of years on different moose research questions, as well as the state that I work for. So it's our wildlife health program, and I'm again with Minnesota DNR. But we focused a lot to begin with on adults and what was really going on with animals and the causes of mortality when the population started to decline in the early 2000s, like 2005 and 6. We had about 8,000 moose or so in the Northeast, and then by 2010 we were down to half that. So we had this big drop in moose numbers, and we focused a lot on adult survival at that time, as well as newborn calves. So what happens those first couple months after calving? And we've learned some great things for what does happen. For one, for newborn calves, this seems to be the biggest challenge that they have in those first few months is really predators. So it's both wolves and bears that seem to be the most efficient at catching them at that age. But after they make it to, past that, so after they're about 4 or 5 months old, we really didn't know much about their survival. But on our adult side of it, most of those animals were already prime animals, 6 or 7 or older. Mm-hmm. And so we started to learn what were the challenges for older moose. But again, we were missing that middle cohort of animals, which is a huge driver if you want to have a population that's going to grow. And we do have some opportunities, we hope, to do some management intervention and try to promote the health of moose through better forest management, more productivity in our forests to try to give animals a better chance to reproduce at a young age and then to do so successfully. So that's really why we've focused in on this group of moose, because it's been totally, understudied at this point in time.
And Michelle, I want to focus in on you. You said that you think moose are the coolest mammal on the planet. Well, how long have you been studying them?
Well, fortunately, I've been at this for about 22 years with Minnesota DNR. So I'm not going to say my age, but you can do the math. They're just so cool. Not only are they, like we talked about, they're big. And I grew up on a dairy farm, so I'm used to being around big critters, but these guys are bigger. And they're just so chill. So moose, they just don't really seem to have too many worries in the world once they get to be 1,000 pounds. They just are, kind of a mythical creature, really. Folks always love to talk about moose, and they're always an enjoyment when folks see them. I work in a wildlife division where we might have some other controversial species we manage. I don't know, let's say deer or wolves.
Yeah.
I can get an earful real quick about what people think we're doing right or wrong when it comes to some of those animals. But when it comes to moose, it's all smiles. So it's really fun to work on a species that is really valued across tribal and state and really all citizens in Minnesota.
Don't they ever scare you? Because let's let our listeners know, how much do these animals weigh?
Well, an adult bull will be roughly 1,200 pounds or so at their peak. That could be a little more, a little less. Females, more like 800 or 900 pounds. Those are adult cows. And the calves that we were just handling were about 400 to 500 pounds.
Jeez.
So that's a lot of moose.
Yeah, that's a lot of moose. About how, for someone that's maybe never encountered a moose that's listening to us here today, like how tall, what sizes? Those of us that live in our region like Frida and I do, we know we want to give them distance. God forbid you have a vehicle accident with a moose. But the thing is if that happens, it feels like half the times a moose will walk away and you're left with a totaled car. And that's not really a joke. I mean, that's kind of the way it is. But describe the moose for someone that's listening that doesn't really have an idea. You gave us a weight about some general sort of, dimensions of the moose.
Sure. Well, one thing that's unique about moose, too, is they have long legs. And that's important because they're used to living where there's deep snow. So where we think that's an impediment to movement, they're like, that's no big deal. I got these long legs. I can just cruise right through this snowdrift. But if you're like a deer, you're trapped. So moose are built for this kind of winter. The Lake Superior country is their home, and so they don't have any concerns about snow depths up to a point, right? So they're built for it. So they're tall, as you said. They're going to be. I'm 5.5 feet tall, and I come up to maybe the middle shoulder on a moose.
Right.
So these are tall guys and gals, and they're big, so they don't really have a lot of things to worry about, except maybe getting enough food, finding some place in the shade to hang out on a sunny day, and maybe avoiding wolves. That would be also a good thing.
Sounds like being a moose is cool.
I have to share.
I'm telling you. Yeah.
Years ago, I was at Isle Royale with a bunch of Michigan outdoor writers and sitting there watching at Hidden Lake at Isle Royale and the moose coming in. And one of our writers said, you know what a moose is? A moose is a perfect example of what God can do with spare parts. And I just always remember that because they are the goofiest looking critters. But to me also, I'm with Walt. I keep my distance. And there have been times that, when you're at Isle Royale and you hear them and they're a hooved animal. So it's kind of like how horses, their feet will click a little bit. And they've got some, when you run into a bull, those are big antlers.
We're talking with Michelle Karstensen today on the podcast. She is with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, talking about some of the moose surveying, population research and such. Tell us a little bit about what this project is doing. You're talking about working with like the juvenile moose, and there's usually some sort of tracking and collaring and things like that. Kind of walk us through what you are doing with this project and a little bit maybe in general how you keep tabs on the population.
Sure. And I should say, too, that with this project, as we talked about earlier, it's really a newer study that we brought together, and it's a bunch of really cool collaborators that are all working on this problem. Mm-hmm. So in addition to me working for Minnesota DNR, I do have a co-investigator named Morgan Swingen, and she's with 1854 Treaty Authority, which is an intertribal agency. So it's one of the first times, which I think is really cool, that we've done a co-stewardship research project between tribal and state governments. Right from the start, we wanted to do this together. And then we were fortunate enough to find Tom Irvine with the National Parks Lake Superior Foundation and fold in a cool NGO that had a real interest in this issue. And we also partnered with UMD, or University of Minnesota Duluth, to get some academic partnership and a student to help us on the project. So we started, forming this collaboration right from the start on how we're going to do this. And that was really important, to frame this up with a solid team. But when it comes to how to actually catch moose, some of those things are better left to the real experts, and that's where we find a company to contract with. We contract with a company named Hello Wild, and they're out of South Africa. And they spend about 6 months of the year in the U.S. catching wildlife all across our country. From bighorn sheep and elk and moose to deer and bison and all kinds of critters for different projects and different studies. And the other 6 months, they're back home catching animals in Africa for lots of different objectives there. So these folks really know what they're doing.
How do you keep all of these people together and on sort of the same page? That's a lot of players, a lot of interested stakeholders, people that are going to, in effect, put the boots on the ground. How do you keep it all coordinated?
Well, it's a good thing we all like each other, so we can talk a lot, so that helps. And, we just keep good open lines of communication, and we have timelines and goals that we have to meet. So, we're on it, it's not our first rodeo. But what we can't control is the weather. So this winter, we had big plans to get started right away in January on our project, but weather delays sent the crew that was coming in back a couple weeks, and then once they did get to Minnesota to work with us, we had a lot of weather days that we were down due to high winds or sometimes low ceilings where there just isn't enough clearance that they can see well from the air. So that did slow us down a bit. But we did manage to catch 60 juveniles. So we caught both male and female calves. So there was 38 females and 22 males. And they're captured with the help of immobilizing drugs. So they're darted from a dart gun. So they pop a dart in their butt, and it takes about 3-4 minutes, and then the moose will lay down. And that's when the helicopter crew can land, and either they can work up the moose, or they might come back and get one of the crew that I'd be with at our landing zone and take one of us out to help. And the workup that we do with these moose is pretty quick. Put on a collar, which is how we are able to track them. We ear tag them. We take a couple biological samples and some measurements, and off they go. So the process usually is less than 30 minutes or so for them, but I think it's probably like an alien abduction. If you were that calf, you
Right,
probably
exactly.
have no idea what just happened.
Yeah.
And mom is usually waiting in the wings for you and wondering what's going on and who are you messing with my baby. So we have to keep tabs on her at the same time.
Let's talk a little bit about where you're doing this. I mean, obviously, Minnesota is a large state, but we're talking in connection to areas near Lake Superior, places like that. Where are you doing this, and how do maybe what are some of the challenges with maybe some of the spots being more remote?
Sure. Yeah, the kind of core moose range in northeast Minnesota, starts north of Duluth, kind of like by Two Harbors area, and it goes inland to the other side of Ely and Tower, and then all the way up to Grand Portage. So our capture study area is kind of that whole breadth of moose country, with the exception of the boundary waters. So we are not capturing moose inside the boundary waters. One, because there's restrictions on that as a wilderness area, and it's so remote also that we would have really a hard time accessing animals to learn about why they may have died. So also logistically, that's pretty tough. So we try to spread the collars out across that whole area. And since we're going to be doing this catching for 3 winters in a row, we have an opportunity to kind of fill in gaps. Like this year, we didn't get to put many collars out by Tower, Ely area due to weather. So we have fewer there than we wanted, and we have more kind of in the Isabella area. And so next year when we start, we'll start more in Ely. And it's also reflective of the moose population, isn't evenly distributed. Some areas are just moosier, and you're going to find, more animals available, and some are going to be less dense, but also like super important to understand how some of those animals more on the edge of what could be good range are living. And if, again, there's ways that we can improve that habitat to make it more productive for them.
Michelle, how in the world obviously, you know the geography that moose love, but how do you find them in the winter?
Well, one cool thing we had this year is we had an additional tool that we haven't had before. So typically we send up a fixed-wing aircraft, like a Cessna, that flies, top cover over the helicopter company looking to spot moose ahead of them, so we can guide them into moose that you can see from the air. But as you can imagine, sometimes it's hard to see a moose if it's thick cover with a lot of pine trees. Mm-hmm. Even though they're big, when you're up 2,000 feet, they become very small. So we had the added tool this year of a thermal camera that was recently fit on a DNR plane that can actually look for their heat signatures. And man, was that cool. Yeah. They would light up like little Christmas trees under the dense cover. And you could even see their footprints as they moved. They would light up where the heat was just left behind. Yeah. So it was a really interesting way for us to identify moose. And they can do this from, 2 miles in the air, zoom in down to these animals. So the moose have no idea that plane is flying above them. Mm-hmm. And we were able to locate moose with the help of that device. It doesn't quite get to the right, all the way down to the sex of the animal for those calves. So that did take an even closer look from the helicopter company, because we wanted more females than males. But it sure showed us where moose are to go investigate. So that was very helpful.
What is the body temperature of a moose?
Well, not that different than us. So they're going to be around the 99 to 101, 102 range. So
more like menopausal women. I got it. Yeah, Or at least that's how we feel it.
I'm not going to even comment on that one. I might be about 106 right now.
Right, you've got it, baby.
We're talking here with Michelle Karstensen, who is with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, talking about moose population studies in Minnesota, which, of course, is along the shoreline of Lake Superior. Why is this such an important study to do, in your opinion, Michelle? And why is this also important to the wildlife in Minnesota, the upper Great Lakes, Lake Superior? Why is this important to keep tabs of?
I think, this project in particular, it's exciting, for a variety of reasons. One, we get to do moose research across the whole extent of their core range in the Northeast. And we have this information gap we've been talking about, really trying to understand why the moose population over the last decade and a half has been kind of stagnant. And so for the population to start growing, we need to try to understand what's limiting that growth. And one aspect of that, again, could be this recruitment of these younger moose into the, reproductive part of the population. But secondly, we get to do it with really cool partners and get to do this as a collaboration between tribes, state government, and NGOs, and really work together to elevate, the face of moose, to kind of restore enthusiasm about moose research to Minnesotans, because we get to talk about this project and promote some of the information that's coming out of it and share that with folks. So I think it's a way to actually, infuse some new energy into the value of moose for Minnesota, and trying to remember that, it's our role here as stewards, right, to try to help this population thrive. And if there's things that we can do, we should be doing it. And we should all be doing it together. So this project really represents that collaboration and using, that opportunity to really elevate moose.
And Michelle, you're doing the study in winter. And that's got to be, like you said, moose are good. They can handle it. But what about summer? And I mean, we've seen moose so infested with ticks. Do you have a plan at all? I mean, is there something more that we can find out if we also were to do this, say, in July and August?
Well, the winter is really just the season when we catch them and put the collars on. But we're monitoring them year round. So the collars that we put on these animals will last about 3 years. So we follow them daily. We can see their locations on my computer right now, what they're doing and where they are. And we're really geared up to respond to a mortality should a moose die, and then investigate why that is. And that we can do any time of year. And so, you're right. There's challenges for moose outside of the winter season, and actually it's more challenging for moose in summer because they're adapted for the cold. Yeah. So sometimes they struggle with excess heat and finding good places to cool off, and also to find good food. So some of the things we'll be able to look at with the data from this project is how they're using their habitats in the summer, and what are important refuges, for example, for them to have in their home ranges to find shelter but still find good food. And we can look at why maybe some moose are doing better than others, or why some are reproducing earlier than others. It could be related to the habitats that they're in. And again, giving us an opportunity to do some improvements. But they are struggling with ticks. Sadly, this winter right now is a tough one for them, because the ticks have had 2 mild winters in a row to really thrive. So we did see a lot of hair loss, unfortunately, in the moose that we just collared this winter. And that's probably going to take the hardest toll on those young moose. Yeah. That just don't have enough body size and, honestly, enough blood volume in some cases to feed what could be 70,000 ticks on one moose.
Yeah. Oh my gosh!
Wow,
70,000.
That's really something when we think about that. So I'm curious though. You mentioned all the stakeholders, all the NGOs, the tribal governments, the state governments, everything like that. Obviously, you're working together on a fundamental level to get this information. But what is the goal with this? Where is this going to end up? People get involved with a project like this because they want to be able to either have the numbers, the results. What is the goal with this, and maybe where will people be able to maybe see what you guys find?
Yeah, I mean, the goal is to really understand recruitment rates overall, which again is a term biologists like to throw out there for really talking about population growth, trying to understand about the younger animals surviving and getting recruited into the population to become reproductive. So that is a really key driver. And so, as I mentioned, we really don't know much about that segment of this population, so really trying to key in on that. And then not only understand, what what their challenges might be, but also help understand how productive they are, because that goes into how we model the moose population and how we can predict trends that might be happening across the moose population, and again, be a trigger for management techniques that we could use in the forest to try to bolster moose numbers in key areas. And this is important information to share with managers, both tribal and state, that are working to manage the forest and the landscape to promote not only healthy moose, but they manage for lots of species, right? And they also manage for, like the timber industry, right? Mm-hmm. So there has to be logging, there has to be commercial use of forests, and there's a balancing act between creating good habitat and maintaining good habitat, and also meeting a lot of other pressures that might be happening in this system. So we want to share what we find so that folks making decisions about land management in general know what's good for moose. And if we want to, increase moose numbers and moose distribution, maybe these are the areas to focus in, or some of the things that we really should be, stressing as we want to focus on population growth.
Are the Canadians keeping watch on this as well?
Sure are, eh? Yeah, they actually have a similar project happening right now in the Thunder Bay area, so just across the border from us. They've been collaring juveniles as well as some adults and looking at some of the same things we are, which is super cool because we can then share information because, while we have different political jurisdictions, the moose really don't care. They're all just moose.
Right.
So yeah, we get to work with our colleagues in Ontario and in Manitoba, and Michigan has a moose study they just also started. And so we're actually talking every couple months among all of these jurisdictions and sharing where we're at with our projects and, tackling some challenges together. So there's a lot of, cross-fertilization between moose projects.
Of course, the Big Lake has been helping generate a lot of snow in our region for this winter. As you mentioned a moment ago, it had some delays on the project starting and such. But in terms of, we talked about the moose being able to handle snow. With all the big snow that has hit the Lake Superior shorelines this winter, is this amount of snow, is this good for moose?
I don't think it's really a problem. Mm-hmm. They're built for it. So I think where it becomes kind of a challenge is the time of year where it starts to have some melt on the surface and you form that crust. So being a moose with long legs and a heavy body overall, You're going to post hole right through that stuff, right? You've probably done that before, trying to get through a snowbank you thought would hold your weight, and then you misjudged how many donuts you really had with your morning coffee. So in that case, when you plummet through and you're up to your waist, it kind of sucks to move around. Mm-hmm. So what can happen in that transition is the moose are going to post hole through and slow down, but the wolves are going to be able to run right on the surface. So that transition time can be a challenge for moose. It's not so much about the cold temperatures or just snow in general, but it's that changing condition that might give a predator an advantage on an animal that, let's say, might be dealing with a heavy winter tick load and feeling a little weaker because of the blood loss they've been suffering. So those animals can become an easier prey item when those conditions are just right.
It's really interesting, this information that you've been sharing. Some of these thoughts, for Frida and I, we're very familiar with moose, and we're in this region. And as a 6'3" tall, 300-pound man, I certainly understand post-holing through a snowbank, believe me. But, we're curious here as we're kind of looking at each other, listening to your reacting to your comments, that this sounds like this is going to be some good information out there for people to check out. What is the best way maybe for people to keep tabs on these projects, to kind of stay in contact or learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So luckily for us, the National Parks Lake Superior Foundation is going to be the organization that's hosting our project's website. So we've been branded the Northern Moose Alliance. So you can find us online through that. And there's going to be project updates, a blog from the field from one of our field biologists, some cool interactive things for members of the public to share photos of moose for a citizen science project we're actually going to be launching here next week. And basically, all updates will be kind of shared through that mechanism. So I would say check out the National Parks Lake Superior Foundation website, particularly search for Northern Moose Alliance, and you'll find us.
I am so glad to talk with you, Michelle. And I got to tell you, we're going to get you into Marquette somehow because you're going to have to come talk moose over here. And there's a beer for you with Walt and Frida because holy cow, I just so appreciate it. And I feel so confident. I mean, first of all, moose still scare me, but if you're in front of me and we run into one, I'm going to feel good because you probably know that moose's name.
Well,
you need to have a tree. That's one thing when you're out there with moose is you need a tree between you and the moose.
There you go.
And so find your tree.
Yeah,
in case the moose turns around and its ears go down, you want to know where that tree is.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. Michelle, really, it's been a pleasure having you on with all the information you've shared with us today. I'm hoping that folks will go seek out the website, find out more about this work, and we wish you the best with it and safety out there and some good results.
Thanks so much. It's been fun.
It's Michelle Karstensen with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, Wildlife Health Group leader. And you said, Frida, when we were getting ready to do this today, that this was going to be a good chat. And I'll tell you, she had brought a lot of information to the table. I mean, you and I both, as I mentioned through the conversation, we know moose. We are familiar with them. They are in our region. But for someone that's listening on the other side of the planet that hasn't had a chance to encounter something like this animal in person, it is a stunning, amazing, large, powerful animal. And the way Michelle, was just comfortably, not casually, but comfortably helping coordinate this kind of information so they stick around was really refreshing.
When we talk to government officials, do you ever get the feel like, I want to be on their team? And Michelle is so salt of the earth and Minnesota nice. And, well, she grew up on a Wisconsin dairy farm. But anyway, let's talk Great Lakes. You got
Midwest,
it.
Great Lakes. Lake Superior, nice. Okay.
I want to be on her team and how she was able to gather the team. This project is huge and it's expensive and it takes a lot of working parts. And she says they're having fun and they're getting science done. They're working together. I love the word collaboration.
Yep. And it's going to result in all this information that'll be on the website that she mentioned. We'll also have that connected with this particular podcast. But, it's just really important to keep an eye out as we talk about the wildlife in and around the Lake Superior region. The moose is the king. Let's just be honest. You got the bear, you got the wolf, you've got all of that. But let's just be honest, even a bear will kind of double look at a moose. It'll be like, okay, so it is a very important conversation. And I was really glad that we're able to do that today.
Oh, and I'm so proud of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a board member, when I know that we've helped to pull this all together and that you go to the NPLSF site, National Parks Lake Superior Foundation, then go into the Northern Moose Alliance, check in on this. It sounds like it's going to be such a great website for the kids and grandma and grandpa and everybody to sit around the campfire and talk about the moose of our region.
Of course, that's also where you can go to find out a little bit more information about the foundation. That is the foundation website, and that's the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. That's where you can find a way to get a hold of Frida and I, talk about maybe some of the topics that you'd like to hear on the Lake Superior podcast. But that's pretty much going to do it for us this time. I'm Walt Lindola.
I'm Frida Wara. Thanks for listening. The National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, NPLSF, is the only official nonprofit 501c3 fundraising partner of the National Park Service for all 5 U.S. national park sites on Lake Superior.
To learn more about NPLSF projects and programs, you can visit the website at nplsf.org or friend them on Facebook.
I'm Frida Wara.
And I'm Walt Lindola. Thanks for listening to the Lake Superior Podcast.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.